Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. I'm excited to continue our conversation with Richard Hanks. He's the son of Marion D. Hanks. Richard also wrote the biography of his father with Signature Books. And we want to thank Signature for allowing us to give away a free copy. It was autographed by Richard. Go to gospeltangents.com/contest, and you could win this book right here. In our next conversation, we're going to be talking about Marion Hanks' faith crisis. I was surprised to find out that he had one. We'll also talk about how the 70s role has changed and how Richard Hanks always spoke his mind, especially with top church leadership. You won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out.
And another thing I should probably also bring up is this whole concept of faith crisis. We went past it quickly.
I would like to dive into that.
He had his own, and he was open and honest about them. And there's a great quote in here that says, I don't know if I'll ever know all the answers to the questions I have, but so in other words, he had a shelf, right? And his belief was that his words, not mine, you should stay inside and lift. And so that's what he said to everybody. Gene England and he was one of Gene England's big mentors. For those who don't know Gene was kind of a liberal. I don't know how you even describe Gene. He was out there way before his time. But
Terrell Givens talked about him.
But in my dad's letters to Gene, he was like, Gene, stay inside and lift. Anyone can point fingers from outside. Stay inside and lift. And then President Uchtdorf later said, lift where you stand, or something like that. And then doubt your doubts before you doubt your faith. And those are all the same general concept, which is, yeah, you can leave and go away. Where are you going to go? Most of the people I know who've left the church are going to be atheists, which is so sad. Let's say the church makes mistakes. We believe in repentance for you and me. Why can't we have repentance? It's all sort of this same concept is let's make it better. Whatever we're doing, let's be lifting people. He had this he had this knack of making you, when you left his presence, you wanted to be better. And he would teach from Goethe. He loved Goethe. I'm going to say that wrong. The main story of Pretty Woman, Julie Roberts, right? What are all of them? Pygmalion, My Fair Lady. They're all the exact same story, right? Which is Goethe's quote, if you treat a man or woman as he is, he will remain as he is. If you treat a man or woman as they can become, they will become. I'm paraphrasing.
Mm-hmm. That's
how he treated people, everybody, right? You'd leave his presence, go, well, he thinks I can do it. I guess I better do it, And my very favorite story on that was, I'm a bishop. I was a bishop here, and this word about Kali, I don't know, I got to think about this, 2002, I guess it's been 23 years. And I got a funeral from one of the sweet people in my ward, and I show up late, and I get there, and the funeral guy, who's the guys who move the caskets around, right? And are there to help with the funeral. We've all been to funerals. Mm-hmm. He says, can I talk to you, Bishop Hanks? And I said, sure. And he takes me in the bishop's office. And I go, we're starting in 10 minutes. And he goes, I just need to talk to you about your dad real quick. And he says, I was a stake president in the Midwest. I'm 70-something years old now. I just do this to keep busy. Your dad came to, a general authority who we would all know on this podcast, an apostle, came to our stake and just beat us senseless. Everything we'd done wrong, all our numbers were low. We weren't magnifying our callings. We weren't living up to what was expected of us, blah, blah, blah. He said we all went home with our tails between our legs. He said a year later, Marion D. Hanks came to our stake, and he said, you know what you need to do, brother, and I don't need to point out all your mistakes. And he said these words. I put these in the book. When the previous general authority left us, we all felt like we needed a shower. When your dad left us, we all felt like we'd had one. And, I wanted my grandchildren to know about this man. Ends up that lots of people it's resonating with a lot of people that that say, gosh, I wish he was alive today. Or, I mean, think about some of these things. They're uplifting things, like calling the restoration the more excellent way, rather than we're right and you're wrong. Or any of the merciful, which said what Jesus taught over and over and over again. And I think that he was pleased in the end to see the church do so much more service than it had prior to that time.
Very good. One thing I would like to talk a little bit about, this gets into more of administration instead of ministration.
Okay.
But it was interesting to me, I think because it's been within my lifetime to see the evolution of the first council of 70 to the quorums of 70. I mean, one of the things that I found really interesting, you had your there were only 7 people in the first council of 70.
Right.
And currently, with a member of the first quorum of 70, or even any quorum of 70, can ordain a stake president, but that wasn't the case when your dad was 31 years old. He did not have the authority to do that. Can you talk a little bit about how, because he served in the presidency of the 70 twice, how it changed from the first time to the second time,
Sure.
and the reorganization of the quorums of 70?
Sure. Actually, he served in what we would now call the presidency of the 70 3 times.
Okay.
So once it was called, the first time in 1953, it was called the first council of the 70. Then the last 2 times was one of the 7 presidents of the, I can't remember.
Of the 70.
Yeah, they've changed it actually a few times. So when he was first called, and again, he knew the scriptures inside and out, he was kind of surprised. Again, let's see if we can figure this out. There were the first presidency, so that's 3. The patriarch, that's 4. 15 or 12 apostles, that's
16.
So we're up to 16, and 7 is
23.
23, and I'm trying to think ahead. So I think there were 6 assistants to the 12, or maybe 7.
Okay.
23. So that's 30.
Mm-hmm.
And then then the presiding bishopric. So it's 33.
Okay.
That's the number I was trying to get to in my head ahead.
Okay.
It's not that I don't know how to add. And the sealing power was in the 15. And I don't know if the patriarch could or not, but there was no sealing power.
I think so.
So he didn't have the sealing power.
As
70 for the first 8 or 9 years, couldn't ordain a bishop or a stake president, even though he could call them and choose them.
Because back in the day, you had elders, 70s, high priests.
That's right.
And so a 70 was not even a high priest.
That's
now
right.
They're all high priests.
That's correct. So and one of the things that what's his name? One of the other 7 presidents, he was big on this. The scriptures don't talk about it that way. The scriptures say elders and high priests, and the 70 are something completely off to the side, like the patriarch.
Equal in authority with the quorum of the 12.
Equal in authority, that's right. And that's still the case today, as not understood by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
I get this from my Community of Christ friends. So Mark Shear is a historian for the Community of Christ, and so he emphasized that.
I get it from him. Who got it, by the way, from some of his older brethren. When he goes in at 31, they're 79. They've been doing this thing for 50 years, 40 years, some of these guys. And they are not happy with the way the 70 have been treated all over the church, not just the 7 of them, as if they were sort of second-class citizens to the high priest.
Because they're not high priests.
Because they're not high priests. But the idea was they were missionaries. The 70 were missionary-oriented. So it was not a higher order of apple. It was an orange. It was completely different. And Dad, again, knew the Doctrine and Covenants very well. So I have these papers that he wrote. There's a few actually journal entries that are a little edgy in here where he was just not happy, where he goes to a meeting and he's told that we're going to finally, because all this time, think about it, the church is exploding and they need to push down. You just have to. As something gets bigger and bigger, you have to push decision-making down, right? You can't
Mhm.
You can't keep
You
having.
can't micromanage.
No, you can't have every single stake president, and every missionary, by the way, was ordained
By an apostle.
by a general authority in Salt Lake City. It's like you cannot keep doing this and have the church grow, right? So he's constantly talking about pushing the authority down.
Now stake presidents do it.
Right. The state presidents call their own patriarchs. Didn't you? Used to patriarchs all came centrally. Everything came centrally. So he's going out and he can choose a stake president, but he can't, or you can't set apart any bishop or ordain any bishop or ordain. He can't do anything. It's just crazy. But it's at that point in the restoration of the gospel, right? President Nelson's always talking about the gospel still being restored. Dad said that 150 times. The gospel is, Joseph Smith wasn't handed all these manuals, right? Joseph Smith probably got up from prayer one day and said, 12. I should have 12. I really mean that. I believe that. I don't believe that the gospel was handed to Joseph Smith. So therefore, there are going to be some, roads that we have to pull back from and go, we probably do that. So the short version of this long thing is he goes to this meeting and Harold B. Lee stands up and says, we're going to have these new things called regional representatives. And my dad is like, it's in the Doctrine and Covenants. So he wrote all these position papers on the restoration of the 70. I don't believe he's gotten credit anywhere. I don't believe anyone knows that, but I have the. Well, I don't have.
Well, apparently, he must have convinced President Kimball.
Yeah, well, that's when he wrote the document. President Kimball had him write the documents. I'm not just trying to say my dad, changed everything, but I also don't want to pull back from what I know is true. And what I know is true is that I have the documents he wrote saying, by the way, he didn't write all the documents. He collected them and wrote a few, but they'd already been written by other previous 70s, right? They'd written all kinds of, not Talmage, not Widsoe. John A. Widsoe had written voluminously, if that's the word, on the restoration or the recreation of the 70 as explained in the Doctrine. The Lord had already set it all up. But we went down this path of assistance to it was my dad. He was an assistant to the Quorum of the 12.
Right.
And then below that, regional representative. Well, now we're doing exactly what the Doctrine and Covenant says all these 60, 70 years later. And so he was big on that, and they called him. Then they call him to go to Hong Kong. And 3 months after he's in Hong Kong, Mark Peterson calls up and says, you got to move back to Salt Lake. Yeah. He was like, no, you can't run half the world's population
from Salt Lake.
From Salt Lake. And so now what do we have? We have all these area presidents and they're all over the world. And I mean, the Lord knows what he's doing. That's how this is kind of, you didn't ask about my testimony, but I believe eventually the Lord knows what he's doing and eventually will catch up to him. But I bet sometimes, what did Jeff Holland, President Holland once said, we're all the Lord has to work with, and I bet that makes him upset, or I bet that annoys him sometimes. I think that's a good answer to that.
And so he was called to the first council of 70. Was it 1953? Does that sound about right?
31.
And then, do you know approximately the other two stints when?
They're in the back. I have a timeline. Okay. But one was right near the end. I can tell you every time he could be put in, they would put him in. So probably.
Like, do they have terms of service or anything?
No, not in his case, because they would put him in. Oh, and then he got called to Hong Kong, so they'd take him out, right? And then he came home from Hong Kong and was a temple president, and then they put him in again, right? And because he was a terrific leader. He was. Gosh, this is a part I'm trying to just not be starry-eyed son, but he was a presence. He was deferential to those above him in seniority of something, but that didn't stop him from. Let me back up. He comes home from England. He's minding his business. He's trying to get back into the flow of Salt Lake and everything. And President McKay calls him up and says, "Will you come down to my office?" Comes down and says, "I'd like to give you a blessing." Puts his hand on his head, on my dad's head, and gives him a blessing unilaterally without being requested. And the blessing said, "Let your voice be heard." Even if it's in opposition to others, and even if it's against the status quo, let your voice be heard. Now, his patriarchal blessing all those years earlier had said effectively the same thing. And so that's I think that gave him courage or whatever, but he would go, again, he would be deferential to others, but there was no, I'm thinking of examples. I can give you a couple more that will just, I am in, we go to the football game in San Diego. BYU's playing somebody, playing Navy. I'm in a room with not Glenn Ford, Gerald Ford.
Oh, the president.
Ford. Yeah. Anyway, I'm in this room with all these admirals and all these, right. And I go to the corner because I'm trying to hide. I'm trying to hide in the corner and not be noticed. But, I got to meet everybody and everything, and I'm standing there. I think I'm getting the story right, but this part of the story I'm absolutely getting right. I'm standing behind two admirals. And they're there to watch the Navy beat BYU or whatever. And the one guy says to the other, "Who's the guy right there? Who's that guy?" And the other admiral says, "I don't know, but you can feel his presence."
Wow.
And that's how he was. I mean, again, I love the apostles. I love other than the prophet, I mean, he was on equal footing with anybody, and it just didn't. I mean, think about getting called to England and have to go up against this really famous guy who is in the first presidency and is telling, and my dad was never one to hide. He didn't say, "Well, the prophet, sent me." He just looked Henry Moyle in the face and said, "No, we're going to do this, what the scriptures say we're going to do." And I suppose that's why he never became an apostle, because he just didn't, he was not afraid.
He wasn't deferential enough.
Yeah, he wasn't a sycophant, and he didn't put up with bullies. He hated bullies. And some of the church leaders are bullies.
Mm-hmm.
If they have, some of them have been called grizzly bears and other things. And, we're at a Golden Eagles hockey game, and a guy's spilling beer down my back. I'm 15.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad turns around and said, please don't do that. And please stop. And about 10 minutes later, please don't do that. And pretty soon we're all outside. And I'm like, "Dad, this is not good." Mormon general authority thrashes drunk guy. And he just did not.
Can you talk about the Sports Illustrated letter? I thought that was awesome.
Isn't that awesome?
I was a big Sports Illustrated fan. So,
well, first of all, my dad was an unbelievable athlete. I mean, think about this. I just start with this. He won the all-church basketball tournament, right, as a 26 or 7-year-old. Over the next 40 years, he was the Utah State handball champion when he was in, I think, his 30s. He was then, racquetball was invented, and he became the Utah State racquetball champion, not the general authority, right? The racquetball champion. Then squash came to town, and he was the head of the Desert Gym. So he became the Utah State, now he's in his 60s, so it's the senior division, Utah State squash champion. He could thrash anybody at any sport. So he writes, back to your question, he writes these letters. And that one to the Sports, he had been in Sports Illustrated, actually, was quoted. It was I didn't really care about the church news or Time magazine.
I was a Sports Illustrated guy,
but my dad was in Sports Illustrated in 1958, before I was born. But he wrote this letter, and this author, sports writer, had written about a guy in, I can't remember if he was in baseball or football, NFL, but they were aggrandizing his going from bar to bar to bar. And my dad wrote this letter saying, "I'm sure that all of the thousands of people that were killed by drunk drivers this year, felt very, very good with your," I mean, that's just, that's just the way he was. Maybe he could have been more diplomatic in his relationships, but I wouldn't want him to change. I mean, there are reasons why he spent almost 40 years and never was made an apostle, because they would come, they would come and stay at our house because he was so loving, right? I can still remember Tom Perry and Elder Scott, and all these guys would come, and they'd come in and they'd be beneath him because he's one of the 7 presidents of the 70. And then they'd get made apostles. Russ Ballard, Jeff Holland was his missionary. And so he, like I said, he would train them. Mm-hmm. At my mother's funeral, President Nelson got up and talked about how when he and Dallin Oaks were called, they're called the same day. Mm-hmm. And they were sent by President Hinckley to go learn how to what the temple was all about from Marion D. Hanks. And President Nelson said, I still have the card. It's in my locker in the Salt Lake Temple. Here's what Elder Hanks taught me the day I became an apostle. Again, I'm sorry to make it sound so congratulatory, but it's one of the reasons I wrote the book, because I don't think there's ever been anybody quite like him, or will ever be anybody quite like him, or maybe. We'll see.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Richard Hanks. He's the son of Marion D. Hanks, and Richard is the biographer of his father's biography, To Be a Friend of Christ. We're giving this away, so go to gospeltangents.com/contest. You could win this copy, autographed copy right here. In our next and final conversation, we're going to be talking a little bit about how Marion Hanks started early morning seminary, the calling of stake presidents, and the end of Marion's life, which unfortunately was marred by dementia. So you won't want to miss this conversation, but it's only available to newsletter subscribers. Go to gospeltangents.com/newsletter, and I'll send you a secret link to the final part of our conversation where we're going to be talking about this.
He's teaching at West High, and the church has early morning seminary, but it's at 7:30 or 8. But the kids that are on the extracurricular stuff can't make that. So they come to him and say, can we come at 6:30, early morning? So at his funeral or somewhere, I got up and said, yeah, he did mostly good things. This wasn't one of them. Because we all had to go at 6:30 in the morning. Yeah, but he started. So then they said, well, we want you to go do this in California. And he said, no, I'm not moving to California. This is before he was a general authority, but...
Thanks for listening, and I hope you to continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt. So check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.